We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team. I would be very careful about slinging stone. Am I going to get sued? Is that legal on this?
I like football season, all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. No Steve today. Apparently the man's sick and he's got to rest up for a grind marathon of draft coverage during the draft days 1, 2, 3, review show, review podcast, all kinds of stuff coming up. So the man's sitting this one out. So we have the great Anthony Treash coming in for the first time in a long time. Anthony's going to be on day 3 of the draft on the show. Welcome in.
Yeah, I think the last time I was in the studio got buttered up.
Yeah.
After or before the national title game, new chairs, new logo up front. Looks great.
Yeah, new chairs, 3 Bill certified chairs. So theoretically, these are Steve proof.
Oh.
The last ones, their official weight limit was either 250 or 275 or something. Either way, it was like below what Steve is now pushing. So consequently, there is a chair graveyard somewhere around here from the 3 or 4 old chairs that he's destroyed. These ones, though, are certified to handle 3 Bills.
That's good. I mean, good news is I'm 5'11", hard 190.
Yeah.
So I'm good on any chair.
You and I, we're fine.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. 250, 275, 300, it's all the same.
That's good. Well, me, when I was like 12 years old, on the other hand, probably would have given these chairs a good go.
The downside of these chairs, however, is they have sides to them, which is, again, fine for you and I. Steve, it's getting a little restrictive.
Didn't think about that.
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to dive into draft. We haven't had your draft takes, so we've been listening to me and Steve talk about the same guys forever. We're almost there, almost on draft time, but you've got some interesting takes.
Do I?
You do. We hit one of them just before we went on. We're definitely bringing that up again. I'm going to get your take on the Aaron Rodgers thing and generally buzz through the draft and get to all of your hot takes. But first, we got to tell people that the PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by the great people at Western and Southern Financial Group, who we have put a plaque on the wall to immortalize the wondrous work that they do. While you focus on your roster moves and the draft, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, let's start with the Aaron Rodgers trade. We didn't dive into that too much, but it's finally done. They actually agreed the compensation. They got it done before the draft. Aaron Rodgers is now a member of the New York Jets. The official compensation, I think they flipped picks in the first round. So they have 13 and 15. They swap picks. They get the Packers get a second rounder this year. And then they get next year a conditional first, essentially. So if Aaron Rodgers plays 65% of the snaps next year, which, he will, barring injury, it's a first-round pick next year. What's your take on that trade?
Yeah, I mean, I think Green Bay got a pretty good haul, all things considered. I necessarily wouldn't have done this. I think at this point, the path that they'd gone down, they were kind of forced to because they took Jordan Love. Now was the time to go make the move. There was some disagreements between, leadership and Rodgers. So I think they had to go down this path. I probably wouldn't have gone down that path from the get-go. But, at the end of the day, they got good compensation. I think for New York, it was something they had to do. They had a great team, outside quarterback. Zach Wilson wasn't working. And, at the time, don't disagree with the Zach Wilson pick. I don't think anybody did. Everybody was on board. Lawrence 1, Wilson 2. After that, that's when everything got murky, and you could discuss Fields, Jones, Lance, however you wanted, or thought it was at that time. But I think it's going to be good for both parties, but we'll see how good Green Bay can be with Jordan Love. I have some doubts, even though he did light up those 9 passes earlier in the season. But, I'm rooting for him. Hopefully he can kind of pull something out. But I think what interests me the most is that first-round pick swap. Why did they want to go from 15 to 13?
I don't know. I mean, I think that – so the Packers also get a 6th-rounder this year in that as well. It's kind of fascinating because – once they decided that they were moving on from Rodgers, like once the Packers decided, look, we're done with this crap. We're going to Jordan Love. If not now, when are you going to do it? And, your point is a reasonable one that, like, who the hell knows what Jordan Love is right now? He was not exactly an amazing prospect, was a raw guy coming out. And we're kind of basing the idea that he's ready now on those 9 passes. It's like, it's a pretty small sample size to be working from.
That's scary.
But, first round pick, we're a few years into this thing. It's like if you're not going to do it now, like you're never going to know. And then you just literally blowtorch the first round pick for no purpose. So, and look, we're repeating the Brett Favre playbook. At some point, you just get tired of the crap. So from Green Bay's point of view, I understand entirely just saying, look, it's now. We've decided we're not doing this again. Bye-bye. From that point on, though, I still contend that neither side had any leverage in these negotiations, right? The Packers needed to get him rid. And the Jets needed to bring him in. Like, neither side has any leverage here. But obviously, the Jets blinked. Like, whatever the impasse was in the negotiations, and maybe it was that they didn't want to give up the first this year, the Jets blinked and came back to the table and said, okay, let's make this work. Like, Green Bay held firm enough that they've got, by far, the better end of this deal. Like, there's no guarantee that Rodgers plays any length of time for them, and yet they're giving up a first rounder next year, a second rounder this year, swapping picks, and the 6th rounder. I feel like they could have played a little bit more hardball, strung this out longer, like dragged it out past this year, maybe make it a conditional first next year, period. Like that's the only thing we're giving up, and still got the deal done. Like Green Bay needs this to happen. So yeah, that's my big takeaway from the actual compensation is, like, the Jets kind of got fleeced.
I mean, I think they might have been like everybody, like us. We're just tired of the Aaron Rodgers saga, and they wanted to get it the hell done. That's could be a possibility there. But, yeah, I think they just really didn't have any other options out there. They did poke around other avenues when free agency was going on, trade market, whatever. But, they needed Aaron Rodgers. Because what else? You're going to put Zach Wilson out there again?
No, they needed it to happen.
Yeah.
But it feels like if they'd been patient, like the Pack, as much as they needed it to happen, the Packers also need to get rid of him. Like, they don't have the leverage to go, oh, well, it's fine. We'll keep Aaron Rodgers. Like, if you keep him now, after he's already declared publicly he wants to play for the Jets, after you've essentially said, we're trading him away, we're going to Jordan Love, and then the whole thing collapses and you're like, all right, well, let's just keep him. That's a disaster. Like, Green Bay couldn't do that. So, again, like neither side had any leverage, at which point it feels like the compensation could have been less than what they ended up coughing up for it.
Yeah, I think, too, I mean, I know it was a big debate. Just witnessing from the sidelines, a lot of people are like, oh, Aaron Rodgers was washed, wasn't as good last year in Green Bay. I'm not necessarily buying that. I think let's play the hypothetical game. If he was in Green Bay this year, still think he would have been fine. I know he's getting older, whatever. He may not be in MVP form, but Packers, I would have picked them to win the NFC North with him, right?
Yeah.
Under center. No doubt about that. I think with New York now, maybe it gets a little bit more interesting, and I think maybe those people are saying he is washed will come back and get the last laugh and be like, I told you, he's washed. I mean, he's playing in a new system. I mean, this is a completely different environment that he's ever seen, right? I mean, he hasn't changed teams since college,
Right, except that the Jets have hired his old offense coordinator that was with the Broncos. Why am I blanking? Nathaniel Hackett.
Still.
So theoretically, and this is, you've got to assume this is what's going to happen. Like, Hackett is just going to run whatever the hell offense Aaron Rodgers wants to run.
Yeah, I mean, ecosystem in general, just a completely different supporting cast is the biggest thing that I'm looking at there. Because, I mean, Rodgers has had his core for a while, and I think him losing Devontae did play a part in him not being as high. I still think he was fine for him, but I think that's where I kind of look at this and say, what if this goes south? What if he's okay? What if the Jets aren't contending? Maybe they sneak into the wild card, they're the 7th seed. What's he going to do next year?
Yeah.
And that's when it gets scary for the New York Jets. So
particularly if he was saying this year, like he was 90% sure he was going to walk away and then went into the cave and came back and was like, actually, I'm good. I can play again. Like, that's 90% is quite a large percentage to be like, no, I'm retiring.
yeah, and to your point with Nathaniel Hackett, I mean, that's exactly why Nathaniel Hackett is their OC. I mean, if Aaron Rodgers was not going to be a New York Jet, he probably is not the OC.
Right.
And so I think that's trying to help the cause of getting, it's still his system, but again, you got to get everybody else up to speed, and everybody's kind of one together there.
Yeah. All right, let's stick with the quarterback theme, but move on to the draft guys. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the big four guys. We've kind of done that to death. We talked about a lot about them. I want to talk about the next group of quarterbacks. I want to start with Henson Hooker, though, because if you were listening to Chris Collinsworth's mock draft yesterday, he had probably the single two most, I don't want to use the term crazy because he listens to the show, bold, let's call them. Bold and unique draft picks of any first-round mock draft I've heard. So he had a consensus 5th or 6th round safety going in the first round to the Bengals, who he thinks is better than Brian Branch. It's a hell of a take. And then he had the one that really caught fire yesterday from Chiefs fans, Henson Hooker from Tennessee going to the Kansas City Chiefs at number 31 overall. And obviously Chiefs fans hated that. The more I think about it, the more I think you can construct a case for it. Now, you have to sort of take a few, let's take a few things as read. Like, independent of what you think of Henson Hooker as a quarterback, right? Let's assume for a minute he belongs in that general area, which I disagree with. I know you disagree with as well. But if you assume that Henson Hooker is a first-round type of quarterback based off his tools, that you can make a pretty good argument that, like, drafting essentially an elite backup quarterback is good business for a team like Kansas City. Like, Chris's logic of what's the worst thing that can happen in Kansas City right now is they lose Mahomes for like 4 or 5 games, and all of a sudden they're way behind the 8 ball, versus the other contenders, and they're potentially in trouble. Like, if you could be assured that Henson Hooker was going to become, say, the best backup quarterback in the NFL, getting the best backup quarterback in the NFL on a dirt cheap contract for 4 years, then being able to pick up the 5th-year option and trade him away for probably what you got, what it cost you to get him, if he's good, that's actually fine. That's good. Like, that's probably better. Like, would that be more or less valuable to them than, let's say, George Karlaftis' current career trajectory, which is like, he's going to play a lot, he's going to get some pressure, doesn't look like he's making a tremendous amount of impact, he's going to get a lot of cleanup pressures. Like, the backup quarterback is probably more valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it. It's not probable, but it's not impossible to think of, right? I mean, we've seen some crazy stuff happen like that.
I mean, that to me is less crazy than, like, the Patriots drafting Cole Strange last year.
I don't know about that. We've seen New England kind of do their own thing for a while.
Yeah, but like, separate from the fact that it's New England, so of course they did something weird. Like, the idea of drafting like a consensus 3rd-round guard in the 1st round is, I think, more crazy than taking a guy who's supposed to go in the 1st round, but will be a backup for you because you already have like a cast iron Hall of Fame starter.
Yeah, I think there's a real chance Henson Hooker could go 31. I just don't think it's going to be the Kansas City Chiefs, making the call and turning in the card.
Right.
You can get a few different teams that could trade back in, to get that 5th year. But, to your point, if they did, let's say that does happen. I mean, you look at the way he operated Josh Heupel's offense at Tennessee. I mean, he's super consistent, right? He operated it as it was designed. Was it like a college offense, very gimmicky? Just not anything he's going to see in the NFL. Yeah, I mean, it didn't help him in that regard. Like, we have no idea if he can actually play quarterback at the NFL level. But with this system, couldn't have been better. You know what I mean? So, maybe that's the appeal. He's a good athlete. I guess the problem I have with the entire thing is you look at all these quarterbacks, and you can all pick like one big strength and weakness. And, of course, Bryce Young, it's the size. You look at Anthony Richardson, it's the accuracy. Will Levis, the lack of, true high-level throws, those big-time throws. Didn't really see a lot of them, the regression from last year. With Henson Hooker, yeah, you could pick any because he's got like 5 where you could make a reasonable case against him. He's old, 25 years old. He's hurt, college system, pocket presence. I mean, all these things really add up. And do you really want to invest in that in the first round?
I mean,
that's the whole thing. I think he is going to go round 1. That's why I'm not too big on taking Hendon Hooker early. But if you're drafting him with the intentions of being a backup, it's all about him operating the offense that he was in just as consistent and efficient as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I want to make clear before, there's a social clip of me saying that the Chiefs should draft Hendon Hooker 31. I agree with Chris. I don't think Hendon Hooker is a first-round quarterback. I don't think he should be. I think there's too much unknown about his tape because of that offense. I don't see how you can project that as a first-round guy. I'm just saying the idea of an elite team who has a great quarterback drafting a backup quarterback at the back end of the first round, I don't think is as crazy as people are making it out to be. I actually think that is potentially not a bad idea. Like, we've seen the value of the position is so much. And if the Chiefs lose Mahomes for half a dozen games, Blaine Gabbert is going to survive for 6 games? Are you really comfortable with that? Like, you need something. And if Hooker can be that guy, it's absolutely worth that kind of draft pick. But what's interesting to me, I've talked about my concerns about him. You have the most negative view of Hendon Hooker, I think, of anybody I've heard, because my problem is essentially that offense and the unknown between that and an NFL offense. I just don't see how you can project it. But you actually have a lot of problems with his on-field play in that offense.
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, Tennessee had one of the most explosive offenses in college football. I mean, like I said, and I mean it, he operated that as it was designed, nearly perfect, took care of the football. I mean, obviously only 2 picks. The advanced data matches that 5 turnover-worthy plays for the year, and I don't care what kind of offense you're running.
Like
doing
a 1-point-something% turnover-worthy play rate, which is
that's
better than Bryce Young's, which is 2%, which I've been talking up as a good thing over the last 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But at the same time, you have to look at, okay, is the way he plays the game, can that translate, right? And the biggest issue I have is the pocket presence thing. I mean, you're converting pressure to sacks 29% of the time. That's bad. I mean, that's very concerning. I mean, I'm talking with Ben Lindsay, he's upstairs right now all the time, and we're breaking down these quarterbacks, and he's saying, told me a good stat, like only 50% of his pressure dropbacks results in a throw. That's not sustainable at the NFL level.
Right.
And then you add in everything else I mentioned with, age, injury, and the unknown with this college system. It's like, you look at his receiver, Jalen Hyatt, right? I mean, obviously, he's got speed. We know that. He burned defenses. He had some incredible performances this year for Tennessee, but we don't know if he can be a true receiver at the NFL level. That being said, I would be more confident in trying to, what Jalen Hyatt can do, his floor, he can still be an explosive deep threat, right? And so for that, I'm still fine taking him somewhat early, maybe not first round, but still, you see something there. With Hendon Hooker, I mean, there's just so many ways that you see him play the game that you just don't know if it translates. I mean, again, most of his throws were like he was at his pro day. You know what I mean? Because it was just air.
Right.
People were wide open.
That's
Nobody
what I'm saying,
can defend that super spreader offense. The way they're stacking these guys, you got to play man coverage.
Yeah.
Not a lot of these college corners can play man coverage, and so it makes it very difficult.
That's what I was saying, that you almost learn as much from like the combine position drills as you do watching Tennessee offense tape for Hooker and Jalen Hyatt. Like, it's a complete abstraction what you're trying to ask him to do. It's a good point though that you can, I mean, even if Jalen Hyatt can do nothing else, there's a role for that in the NFL. You can create that wide receiver role within an offense, albeit it's limiting, but you can't create that for a quarterback. If all Hendon Hooker can do is operate that Tennessee offense to a really high level, he can't play in the NFL. Like, there's no way you can create a similar effect in the league because NFL defenses are different, NFL fields are different. You can't create that. So if that's the limit of what he can achieve, you're screwed. Like, he can't play. That's different to Jalen Hyatt, where if that's the limit he can do, he can still play in the league, and actually he can still be quite valuable in terms of like a designated deep threat, even if you have to keep him away from press coverage and, stacked alignments and all that kind of thing. That's still useful. It's not for the quarterback if he can't play.
100%. And I mean, I think in this class too, so the whole theory of, could Kansas City take a quarterback to be a good backup? I don't hate it, but I think in this year's class, I kind of do, because I think there's a lot of good candidates to be a quality backup in the NFL in this class. Clayton Tune, Stetson Bennett, Tanner McKee. I mean, I think there's some guys that could be a viable option as a backup quarterback. Could come in, win some ball games. Stetson Bennett, I love. He's spunky. He comes in, he's tough. He's also smart as hell. People don't give him credit for that. I mean, the way he was executing that Georgia offense,
I knew before watching him that I was going to like his tape. Like, just from seeing a couple of Georgia games, I was like, I'm going to like that guy, and I don't want to. And I went through his tape, and it's like, God damn, I really did like his tape. Like, we were talking before we went on air, and it's like, you know, the top 4 guys that we're talking about are probably the only 4 that have starter potential. Maybe Henson Hooker, you know, depending on, like, that, bridging that gap of offense is just such an unknown. It could go anywhere from total disaster, can't play, to, yeah, he's a good starter. So 5, I guess. After that, is there anybody in this draft class that could be a starter?
I don't think so. But again, that doesn't mean it's like I think the depth of this group, I think the options that you're going to have to choose from on day 3 is going to be the best it has been in a while. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this being a great quarterback class still because of the, you know, high-end franchise guys. There's not a lot of, like, surefire. And like I said, everybody's got that one issue. Henson Hooker may have a few more. But, you know, I think there's going to be some options. You know, with Stetson Bennett, I loved his tape just because of the way he carried out that offense. It was very favorable, but I mean, the timing and just really taking command of that offense, getting into the right play, protection. I think the biggest thing this year, too, is that he was very comfortable operating past his first read. I mean, He was standing in there very calm. You know, you go back to the year before, Georgia still wins the national title. With that SEC title game, they lost. Big reason why they lost, they got into obvious passing situations. You know, Alabama was throwing these different pressure looks, very, very much confusing Stetson Bennett. He just couldn't do anything. I mean, you sensed that panic. You didn't see that this past year. You really saw him grow as a quarterback. So, you know, again, size and age is a big thing with him, but I think he's got some interesting backup qualities to him.
Yeah, he's the one guy where I'm not saying he will be a starter or anything, but if we were 3-4 years down the road and it turned out Stetson Bennett was a baller in the NFL and they somehow able to overcome all of the, you know, the size, the everything about him, it wouldn't shock me. Like, there's something, he's got a little bit of that college Baker Mayfield thing to him, like the swag, the attitude, the doing it the hard way. Like, they tried to replace him multiple times, like, didn't matter. There's something to that, I think, where obviously it didn't work out or hasn't worked out for Baker Mayfield. The negative aspects of his play have subsumed the positive ones, but I still think there's a world where a guy with that kind of like chip on his shoulder or attitude, like experience of having gone through the grind and come out the other side, because a lot of the Jalen Hurts stuff is similar, right? That guy got benched in the national title game for cause. Like, it was the right call to bench him for Tua. Tua immediately made that offense look better. It was the right thing, and that like couldn't have been on a bigger stage. Literally, he has to transfer away, you know, rebuild his career. Now he's a second-round pick. Not a lot of people think he has much of a chance. A lot of other people think the pick is terrible in the first place because you already have Carson Wentz as your quarterback. He just keeps his head down, tries to get better, and all of a sudden he's, you know, one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL and is a few plays away from winning a Super Bowl. I think there's obviously Jalen Hurts has dramatically more physical skills than Stetson Bennett, but I think there's something to that, like, constant, you know, just keep getting better, head down, grind, go through adversity. And like Stetson Bennett is the poster child for that in this draft.
That's a good point. I actually was reading something. I'm very interested in like psychology. And like if I'm reading something, it's usually just about that. And I actually read something a few weeks ago. Like there is something to that, like people that have to face adversity.
Yeah.
And, you know, reaching the top of their craft. That's a real thing. You know, I'm not saying that's always in football. I mean, a lot of, like when you look at the best players in football, most of the time people look at them when they're 11. You're like, you're going to be a superstar,
right.
You know, and they know that, and they are. And we're not obviously talking about all the situations where people are like, yeah, you know, I doubt you. You're not going to work out, and they don't, because it happens all the time.
Like Arch Manning right now, right? The Texas spring game was reportedly terrible, right? That's probably the first time in his life Arch Manning has faced any form of adversity as a football player. Literally the first time ever. He's gone from day one. It's been anointed as the next Manning, right? He's going to be the best of them all. He's got Peyton's brain and arm and Cooper's athleticism. It's the perfect Manning. And then, you know, he becomes like the hottest recruit of all time and then goes to the Texas spring game and he looks terrible. Like, that's never happened to that guy before. This is literally the first time in his life at the age of whatever, 18, that he's hit any form of football adversity. And like how he reacts to that is going to be important.
He's probably rushed. It was like 3 throws. It was a spring game. He's like 17 years old.
Yeah,
you know, maybe.
But like literally, that's going to be the first time he's ever run into like it didn't go perfectly. Like something happened. This He's like, what the hell? I'm not used to this. How does this work?
You got a large crowd saying, "Oh, he may suck." You know,
Right.
Yeah, I get that. Maybe Will Levis is the same way. You know, competed at Penn State, competed for a starting job there,
Right.
lost to Sean Clifford, had to transfer to Kentucky. You know, he was doubted. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying Will Levis is, the guy. You know, I still think I would go with a few other options, but, maybe he follows that same path. Who knows?
Yeah, and people use that a lot as a negative, right? Couldn't beat out some guy at his previous college. Number one, that's going to only become a bigger thing with the transfer portal. Like before, it was a serious. I mean, it at least had resonance because it meant you had to burn a year in order to get the hell away from the competition, right? Whereas now, it's like if you lose a starting job, all right, I'm out. I'll go somewhere else. Like it's going to be a bigger thing than it's ever been in the past. But also, there's tons of examples where a better player couldn't beat out someone else. I was listening today, actually. Did you know the reason that Adrian Peterson from Texas, Palestine, Texas, did not go to Texas? He went to Oklahoma.
Nope.
Adrian Peterson, when he went on his tour of, recruiting, and he talked to Pete Carroll at USC and Mac Brown at Texas and Bob Stoops at Oklahoma, the only question he asked any of them, Nick Saban at LSU, was, can I come in and compete for the starting job right away, like as a freshman? Obviously, all of them are like, yeah, like you're Adrian Peterson. You could compete for a starting job in the NFL right away. Yes. Mac Brown at Texas was the only guy who went, well, Cedric Benson is coming back for his senior year, so it's Cedric Benson's job. You're not really going to be competing. So he was like, all right, go to Oklahoma. Start as a freshman, look like the best running back we've ever seen. Sorry. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that the guy wasn't better in the first place or that there's not a perfectly logical reason for him, not winning a starting job versus whoever. Like, okay, quarterback is obviously different to running back, but Joe Flacco had to transfer to Delaware or Delaware State or whatever it was. I forget. Was it Tyler Palco who was ahead of him? Somebody who, didn't make it in the NFL. Like, it isn't just because a guy couldn't beat out somebody at their first college does not necessarily mean they can't be a good NFL player down the line.
Yeah, look at Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he started small, JUCO, went to Cal, and then he kind of rose his way up. I mean, there's a lot of examples like that. I'm not going to lie, when you said Adrian Peterson, the first thought that came in mind was the Adrian Peterson that played for the Bears in the early 2000s. Yeah. I think he was in a backfield with Garrett Wolf. That was a deep cut. I don't know. I just had flashbacks when you said that. But no, I mean, I think that is real. You could probably find examples of that, I mean, league-wide, of some of these guys that did kind of rise to the occasion. And again, it's not like, you have to face adversity. Right. I mean, I think everybody does with the sacrifice it takes to get there, right? But, that true adversity, something like a Stetson Bennett where you are walking on and, you're not expected to do anything. People are saying you shouldn't be starting over, whomever. And then here you are. You want to tuck a couple natties and could be a good backup in the NFL.
So who is your QB5 in this class? So the big four. I actually forgot that I didn't have Henson Hooker as my QB5. It's become so ubiquitous at this point. And I remember people hated that. But who's your QB5 after those big four if it's not Henson Hooker?
Yeah, I kind of like Clayton Tune from Houston.
That's my guy.
Yeah. Played for Dana Holgorsen. I think he's got excellent playmaking ability. I mean, he's got it there, and I know it was against kind of lackluster competition at times, but I mean, he's had experience, solid production all the way through. That's a pretty good combo to have, good testing. And he really keeps his eyes downfield under pressure. He makes chicken salad out of chicken shit, you know what I mean? So, I mean, he has strong deep ball. He can throw on the move. I like that. I like that in the backup. I think he's a good backup option. For him, Henson Hooker, I get why people like him. I just would never even think of taking that kind of risk, just everything there. So,
well, certainly not in the first. That's the thing.
That's where I get concerned.
The lower down the draft you go, the more I'm 100% on board with the idea of taking Henson Hooker, because unlike these other guys, you can definitely picture a world where he is a starter. Like, he's got the size, the arm, the athleticism. He's got a lot to his game where you're like, that is better than, the Clayton Tune, Jake Haener, Stetson Bennett's of the world. Like, he's got those starting tools. It's an abstraction right now. Like, it's literally like drafting an athlete or a guy that you've seen, do really well at pro days or whatever and being like, I can work in the NFL, which is fine if you're doing that in the third round or the second round or whatever. It's a hell of a lot more risky if you're like, this is going to cost a first-round pick to see.
Yeah, and like with Clayton Tune, like I'm not taking him day 2 even. Like that round 4, yeah, like that's when I'm starting to get interested. I think with the issues with him, I really have concerns about his processing ability. He sees some of this complex NFL coverages. I think he's going to get lost a little bit, lost in the sauce. So he's going to have to be, if he gets, sits on the bench and then you need to come in after a couple of years, I think that's why I kind of like him. But yeah, complex coverages, he saw a little bit of that in college, and he just didn't know what was going on. So, that's where I'm concerned. But, again, with Hooker, he just wouldn't be on my board at all. But with Tune, Stetson Bennett, talked over those guys. Jake Hayner, I think he could be a good backup. He has some of the best anticipatory throws on tape of anybody. I mean, just absolutely beautiful. But again, small. Durability is an issue. That's popped up, throughout his college career. He is a little bit of a gamer. So, all these guys kind of have those issues. But, I think there is a decent crop of backups in this class. I do have a fire stat for you, though. It just came to mind.
What do you got?
I've shared this with everybody. I even sent it to the big boss, Chris. I was like, this is the best stat ever. Anyway, passing yards outside the structure of the offense over the last 2 years. So outside the structure, we're talking undesigned pass attempts outside the pocket. Third in the FBS, Bryce Young. No surprise. Unreal playmaking ability. CJ Stroud, 20th. Anthony Richardson, 59th. Will Levis, third to last. Hendon Hooker, last. Will Levis has 46 passing yards outside the structure of the offense over the last 2 years. Yes. Hendon Hooker has 29. Hendon Hooker has had 79 dropbacks where he's in the pocket, scrambles out. He's only completed 3 passes.
Yeah.
That's a concern. Like, that can't be your game that you live and die off of. You know what I mean? Like, we've seen those quarterbacks fail, but you got to be okay. Like, you got to survive in those situations.
Yeah, Steve had a similar themed stat for Hendon Hooker, which is over his entire Tennessee career, he's had 15 pass attempts beyond his first read, like beyond his first look. 15.
Yeah.
Like, you might have to do 15 times in a game in the NFL, and he's done it 15 times during his Tennessee career. It is impossible to overstate just how much of a complete abstraction that Tennessee offense is relative to what he's going to have to do playing for literally any NFL team. I don't care which side drafts him, any of the 32 NFL teams, it's a different world to what he's have to been doing. So again, it's not, we know he can't do that. It's just he's never had to do it at all. Let's move to wide receivers.
Oh, wait, hang on. For what it's worth, Bryce Young's my QB1. I think I don't even think I said that. I don't think I touched on Young and Stroud and Richardson much.
No.
I think Bryce Young, top first overall pick. Wouldn't think about it, not concerned about the size. I think Carolina trading up, I love it. Get him in Carolina. I think they could be good in a couple of years.
Okay, all right. Let's move to the wide receiver group. How bad is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what's your flavor? Like, what do you need, right? What kind of ingredients do you already have in your offense? That's kind of where you're at, because you just have so many different people, like Josh Downs, Quentin Johnson. It's like, are we going to debate if they're wide receiver 3 or 4? You know what I mean? But it's like, they're so different what they can offer.
Right.
I get concerned with these smaller guys, specifically like a Tank Dell and Zay Flowers. I don't know if they're big enough to play in the NFL. Like, flat out, like, we haven't seen anybody that type of size pan out at all whatsoever. I think overall it's an interesting group. I wouldn't be surprised if you see some day 3 guys really pan out and have strong production, or even third round guys.
Yeah.
And see some early busts. So, I think with this class, I don't think there's any reason to really debate like rankings at all. Like, I get why anybody would have this guy here, this guy there, but it's just so unknown. I think situation is so important here. The only like strong take I have is that Jackson Smith and Jig was wide receiver 1. And I get he's not like super fast. He doesn't have burner speed, and the hammy is an issue, like Chris said on the show yesterday. But man, winning in tight quarters, that's one of the most important things a wide receiver does. He does it better than anybody. The short area quickness, you saw it in the agility drills. It's absurd. He has body control. The ball skills are there. Man, I really do think, assuming the hammy's fine, nothing to worry about, short or long term, I would be shocked if he didn't pan out. I would take him top 12, wouldn't blink about him.
Yeah, I think his floor is very high.
Yeah.
Like, what he's good at should translate. Like, Chris is, I think he does both of the things that Chris was talking about, which is, when you look at a guy and he's open, you have to ask yourself, did he get open, or was he just open on the play because, the defense sucks, or the play call worked? Was he schemed open, or did he get open? I think for Smith and Jigba, it's both. Like there are plays where he gets open, he beats people with his route running, he actually earns the separation himself. There's also a ton of plays in that offense where he's just open. Like the offense works and he's wide the hell open, and somebody finds him with the ball. It's not that it's the Tennessee offense where like Jalen Hyatt is open basically every play, but there is a lot of it in there. Like you have to factor. So when you look at his production, and it's like there's a reason that they move everybody into the slot who's their best receiver, right? It gets them more wide open than it would if they were playing outside. Garrett Wilson was in the slot. Then Garrett Wilson moved outside to make room for Jackson Smith and Jigba, and now Marvin Harrison Jr. is moving into the slot. Like that's where they put the best receiver, because in addition to being the best, it's going to be the most wide opens. You're going to have the most production. So when people look at Jackson Smith and Jigba's crazy season, they're like, oh, he had more production than Olave and Garrett Wilson. It's like, yeah, but he was also playing the position that will get more production than the guys outside of him. So like, you have to bear that in mind, but I agree with you. Like he does get open as well. The wide receiver position was really interesting. Like listening to Chris when he does his rankings, right? It's fascinating because he does as good a job as anybody at coming to the draft with his, like, in a vacuum. Like, I'm not listening to the noise. I'm just going through the tape, and I'm going to figure out whatever my rankings are, right? And that's how you end up with a safety that's consensus 200 and something into the board in the first round.
I wish everybody would do that.
Right, which I love as a concept, right? Because it's all about your own opinions on these players, and yet everybody like gets dragged into this groupthink of like, here's the rankings, and you can tinker with it a little bit, and people were okay with that. But as soon as you go too far, well, now you're just Chris Sims trolling for clicks, right? Now you're ridiculous, or now you're Chris Collinsworth, you're just doing this for trolling, right? But like the receiver position this year in particular, I've kind of been wondering if I did a better job of completely isolating myself from the consensus or the noise, what my rankings would look like. Like when I went through the tape, I love Jonathan Mingo, and I put him 8th when I first did the rankings. When I redid them for when I was relabeling my notes, I bumped him up to 7th. And I'm kind of wondering if I did this without knowing that Jackson Smith and Jigba was supposed to be the number one guy, and Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnson was Renner's number one guy. Like without knowing any of that, how high would I have put Mingo based off just coming to his tape? Because I keep watching that dude's tape and like I don't see the negative here. Like I like everything. The only negative is why he didn't have more production. And as much as I don't have a good answer for that, I don't see a problem with it either. Like he had good production last year. His quarterback wasn't great. Like I'm not using that as a reason to not draft him high. So, like, should I just be saying this guy's like wide receiver 1 or 2?
Do it. I'm going to hype you up right now. Move him up your board.
I should.
Tweet it. Say he's wide receiver 2. What's stopping you?
Problem is, Jordan Addison is my wide receiver 1, so I'd have to put him above Jackson Smith.
Is he really?
He is, yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. I think
that's the one where I stuck with that from before coming to all these guys. Like Jordan Addison jumped out at me watching Kenny Pickett tape, and I'm like, that guy is really, really good. Yeah. And then you went through and you watch him at USC as well. You're like, he's still really, really good. And okay, Jackson Smith and Jigba was good too, but I have more confidence that Addison can win in more ways. Like I don't know if Jackson Smith and Jigba is more than a slot guy at the next level. He might be. I think we're probably too quick to label that as he's just a slot receiver. That's all he can do. He might be able to play outside and be an X. Like he's got the footwork for it. He's got the size. He's not. Like I don't see a reason he definitely can't do that, which seems to be like a foregone conclusion of he isn't going to be.
I respect that. He's just so smooth.
Yeah,
he's just super smooth.
And he's got a really weird movement style. Like he doesn't move conventionally, which is, I think, a good thing for a wide receiver because DBs like so much are keying off wide receiver movements, like what they're doing. Like literally that's their job. If you're playing any form of man coverage or pattern matches, you're reading how the receiver is moving. If that guy is moving unconventionally, it doesn't even matter why, it's harder, right? Because you don't get the same reads, you don't get the same keys. So the fact that he has a strange movement style and he deliberately overemphasizes, over-accentuates like fakes and stuff, like it's why he gets so open. It's why he's able to separate really well.
Make up for the lack of muscle mass,
right?
Because I mean that's a big thing. He was super thin. Can he really consistently win despite having that frame. I mean, I have him as wide receiver too. I think he's going to be
Addison.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a very productive player in the NFL. I think situation does matter there, just like with any other wide receiver, but I don't hate that. You have him wide receiver 1, so it's Addison, Mingo now for your 1 and 2. No, I like that. I mean, I have Smith and Jigba, Addison, Downs, Johnston, Michael Wilson.
Yeah.
That's my top 5.
Michael
and
Wilson's good. That's good. Like, I love that as a shout because I liked Michael Wilson. Where did I have him? I have him at 11, and he's another guy that I'm like, I really should push him higher than that.
The polish that he has. I mean, like, we all know, like, it's a running joke. Stanford, they're just like these big guys that don't separate and they can win in contested situations. And honestly, you look at the rest of their wide receiver depth chart last year, that's exactly what it was. But Michael Wilson, he could do that. But man, he can separate. You saw it at the Senior Bowl, too. He has some of the best cookage tape in the entire draft class. The problem is the durability, right? Yeah. And he's also doesn't have like even an average speed. It's not that great from a long speed perspective. The medicals are just really scary. So, I mean, that's where it's like, if you have him as your 11, if you have him at like 15, like, I'm not going to blame you.
That's the biggest thing.
It goes back to like the JSN hammy issue. If like that's your reasoning with it, I get it because, we've seen situations like this just not pan out. I'm just kind of looking past the medicals and just from a pure tape standpoint, when he is healthy, man, he's got it. He's definitely got it. And you could be said for Kayshon Boutte, who I have not too far behind Michael Wilson. I watched I watched 2022 and I was like, yeah, I'm kind of with everybody else here. And then I was like, I'm going to go back and watch his true freshman. And then I was like, I'm back in. He's got it. He's first round pick. No, not really, but third round. Definitely in there. Just his footwork, suddenness, it's definitely there. But yeah, I mean, he has some injury questions too, and of course, some of the other stuff. But this class is just, again, pick your flavor. Whoever you like a Mingo, wide receiver 2, take him top 20. You do it, Sam. Yeah. You do that. Who cares? Some team's probably going to take Mingo first round, and it's going to be like,
it sounded like that's a real possibility.
I would have gone another direction, but I respect the hell out of it.
Yeah, Michael Wilson, the biggest thing I think is that injury history. Like, he's played in 5 years and has less than 1,000 passing snaps in those 5 years. Like, only been over 200 1 year. It's a pretty extensive injury history for him, which is scary enough, I think. It's always tough to gauge whether a guy's just been unlucky or whether he actually has durability issues, injury proneness or whatever. But I think that's reason enough to be like, talent-wise, he probably is a top 5 receiver, but can I rely on him being that going forward? Probably not. So let's keep him a little bit lower.
The question I have too with him, and like if he was in another offense, you could say this about a lot of people, but if he was in a different offense, what would we think of him?
Right.
Like if he was playing with, not like this is not a slight to Tanner McKee. I just didn't really like the philosophical design of the Stanford offense. It wasn't
good.
Yeah, it was kind of like a little bit of what Wake did, and it was weird.
That's the only element of Renner's Tanner McKee love that actually makes a little bit of sense. Is like the offense definitely didn't help him.
Exactly, and that's kind of where I go to it. It's like I think consensus-wise he'd be a lot higher if he was in another offense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Are there any wide receivers other than, we've already talked a little bit about the guys you have really high. Are there any other kind of dudes you absolutely love that you have ranked way higher than other people?
I like Rashee Rice. I like Cedric Tillman. Again, it's like completely different because if you look at that same range, it's like, do you need a Jalen Hyatt or do you need a Cedric Tillman? Because they do completely different things. So it's like impossible to like firmly rank them. Cedric Tillman, ball skills, exceptional. Again, the role is what you kind of have an issue with, but I think everything else, just he's big, he's physical, can take on contact along the route with no issue at all whatsoever. Good explosiveness, got some hops. And I think there's a lot to like there. Like I said, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell. Like if you want to take him, if you want to take Zay top 25, it's great. He was an exceptional player at Boston College. It's just the size thing I have issues with. Like, can he beat NFL man coverage? I don't know. We don't know. Yeah. I have reasons to think that he just doesn't. He's not going to be able to do that. And Tank Dell, probably the same thing. But, man, if you want to take Tank Dell top 50, like I'm not going to say you're an idiot because he was dangerous in college. Production off the charts.
I love Tank Dell.
Yeah.
Tank Dell, he's my number 4 wide receiver.
Oh.
I love Tank Dell. Tank Dell and Mingo are the 2 guys I'm really high on relative to everybody else.
Who's 3? JSN?
3 is Quentin Johnston. I don't like Quentin Johnston, but I buy in enough to the things he's good at and the sort of physical ability that he has to be like, in this draft class, like I can't really drop that much lower than that. Like I wouldn't pick him, at the time, my initial sort of exposure to him, right, was, all right, Renner has this guy as the number 1 receiver in the draft. I'm going to start with him when I go through the tape. Let's level look. And like, you watch his tape and you're like, really? So like, my first reaction was to message Renner. I'm like, are you sure the TCU guy isn't actually terrible? He was like, yeah. And he sort of sent me these plays of him doing good things. It's like, all right, look, he's bad at a lot of things that are quite important to being a good wide receiver in the NFL. But he is big, fast, and explosive. He's not just a sort of vertical guy. He can stop as well, which is an important part of, like, can you actually be more than a one-trick pony? On these hitch routes, he's able to catch and turn upfield and make big plays out of that. Like, I think there's enough there where you're like, all right, I'm willing to bet on that, the bottom of the first round. Let's grab him and let's see if we can develop him into something more. Like the sort of DK Metcalf pathway of, I don't need him to do much more than that right away, and we'll figure out what he can be down the line. I think I wouldn't have him 1, I wouldn't have him 2, but then you get into this group of receivers. It's like, how many other guys can you really push ahead of him before it's like, we're probably being too harsh at this point?
I'm right there with you. The stop-start ability at that size that's pretty darn good. The ball skills is kind of like the big thing I have issues about.
Yeah.
I mean, just body catches everywhere. But I'm with you. End of round 1 is where I would go with him.
Right.
I think if you got, I think that's another thing too. You can't have Quentin Johnston too low, but if you have him 1, I'm not gonna discount that, but I would have him right around there like you.
Yeah. The only thing I get having him 1 if your argument is the other guys can't be a number 1. Right? If your argument is Jackson Smith-Njigba is only a slot guy, Jordan Addison at his size is only a slot guy, like I need an X receiver. If you need an X receiver, I get having Quentin Johnston as your number 1 guy. Like that, it's not a draft that's stuffed full of those guys. So if that's your goal, I get having him as your number 1. That's like, I have a lot of sympathy. It makes for sort of sometimes really awkward reading or digesting when you're looking at people's rankings that do it this way, but there's a few people out there who really like break down receiver and corner into like a lot of subsets, like zone corner, man corner, off, all these kinds of things. And then slot receiver, X receiver, flanker. It's a pain in the ass sometimes when you're looking at them and like, this is sort of being too granular, but it does make a lot of sense in this draft when you're like comparing Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tank Dell, and Quentin Johnston. You're like, these are 3 wildly different receivers. Like, what are we even doing trying to compare them to each other? They're not playing the same position in the NFL. Or Jalen Hyatt versus Cedric Tillman. I mean, they came from the same offense, but they don't play the same position. It's technically labeled wide receiver. It's not the same.
That's a good point. I mean, I think it can get a little bit tricky with corners. I mean, you look at this group too. It's like, yeah, Christian Gonzalez, you look at him just from a physical profile standpoint. It's like, that guy was made to play press man in the NFL. And you watch him, it's like, this guy's better in zone. He's got some issues when he's at the line of scrimmage and all that. Yeah, I think with the receiver class, I think that's very well said. It's very much, what else do you need? Like I said, what ingredients are you missing from the pantry? And kind of go from there.
Let's move on to the edge rushers, because I know you had some takes about the edge rushers. Hit me with it. What's your hottest take?
I guess I do kind of have some takes. So I really like Nolan Smith. I think he's closer to Will Anderson than a lot of people think. And I think the biggest thing, obviously, doesn't have that power element. It's not going to be there. But, man, he's just a technician. I mean, you could tell. I mean, all these guys that come out of Georgia, that program, we've never seen anything like it. They're just so well coached, well developed. The way he plays the run is just phenomenal. I mean, he's not going to, cede any ground either. Just because it is lacking that power element, he's not going to act like he isn't. He stacks and shed, can lock out despite not having the biggest arms. His hand usage overall is pretty sharp. You can throw in the athletic profile too, just the flexibility. I really like him. He's like a robot against the run. And as a pass rusher, I think if you let him cook, he's in a defense that's going to let him cook on the edge. He's not doing all these different things and kind of giving him a little bit more difficult opportunities to get after the quarterback. I think he's going to put up some numbers. I think he's going to put up some sharp numbers. So I like Nolan Smith. He's my edge too. But, we look at the best prospects in this class. I think he's top 5. Ooh. And again, this class is all about everybody has different rankings, and they should be different because it just depends on what you like. And if you're going to say, I'm worried about his play strength, I'm going to say, me too, buddy. I just think everything else is going to trump that, but that could very well be the reason why he doesn't really become that star. But I personally think he is going to be that star. So I got Willie Anderson, obviously, 1. Willie Anderson, he plays a little passive. You know what I mean? Like, I was expecting to see a little bit more. I mean, obviously, I've been watching him for the last 3 years, but going back through looking at the full picture that he's kind of painted, it's just very passive. I expected to see this just very aggressive player that Nolan Smith kind of plays like sometimes, but he's still he's great. Willie Anderson should be a top 3 pick. I mean, he is that good of a player, but I think Nolan Smith is right on his heels.
That's where I think the like you're using it sort of as a negative. I think a lot of people are saying, he's maxed out. This is as good as you're going to get from Will Anderson. I think there's definitely more potential there in terms of like asking him to play the game a slightly different way. Like I think that Alabama defense did not put him in a position, like they didn't play him like some other teams that have elite edge rushers do, where they basically scheme the whole thing to design them one-on-one to do whatever they want to do and wreck house. Like Anderson had to play very much within the structure of that defense. There's a lot of like reading going on where he's not selling out to pass rush, where he's checking what the quarterback's doing, what the play is. I think there's more to be had by just like cutting him loose at the next level and saying, this dude's awesome, let's let him go. Like, we'll figure out other things. We're not going to, put you in a box and ask you to just play a role. You're better than that. So, like, I don't agree with the people that are like, number one, I think even if he is maxed out at this level, it's really good. So it's just a bad argument. But number two, I don't think he is maxed out. I think that defense actually restricts him enough that, like, simply taking the shackles off gives you an extra 15, 20% to his play.
Yeah, I mean, him and Nolan Smith have that in common. I mean, They were very much like, okay, this is what our defense is. You're going to play this role of our defense. And, at the NFL, you're going to get those opportunities to, let loose. You're going to get those one-on-one opportunities. My edge 3, put him in the same boat. Will McDonald of Iowa State. That defense did not help him at all.
No, he's playing like that, head up 5-tech type of role within that 3-man defensive line. That's
3-man rushes,
not where you want a guy that is like an undersized edge rusher.
He wholly quicked us, though. I mean, the amount of times that he did win, just given his role, I mean, he has great pass rush production going back to 2019. And if you really kind of look at the snaps where he was on the edge and those one-on-one opportunities, his numbers are better than anybody in this class. I mean, just the twitch that he has is just amazing.
The very first note I have on him is stupid lateral quickness. Yep. Like, just absurd. He can step an offensive lineman, like, instantly, which he had to do a lot because he's head up over the dude, like, right in his face immediately. So, yeah, I love that guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think with him, obviously, he can get stuck on blocks. We saw that a lot more. We saw it a lot more than we did with Nolan Smith. He can get a little bit out of control, but I really do think that at the NFL level, he's going to go off as a pass rusher. And again, it's all about like what do you need, because, you can't really compare a Will McDonald to a Lucas Van Ness, a Tyree Wilson, a Miles Murphy. They're just so different players. Everybody thinks of them differently. Because McDonald and Smith, I like them because, just of their ability, like I've kind of pointed out, but they are undersized. They got those size issues. If they hold up to the play strength at the NFL level, I mean, those are rightful concerns, but I think there's enough there. After that, I think that's when you have a trio right there with Lucas Van Ness, Tyree Wilson, Miles Murphy. And I can't figure out Tyree Wilson to save my life. I just can't. I mean, he's a mammoth. He looks like a guy that is playing, just like in a movie, just a menacing Goliath right there. That's Tyree Wilson. You're like, I'm supposed to go up against that guy.
He what he looks like to me? He looks like Lurch from the Addams Family. Like, there's just giant, like, all arms and, like, inevitably heading in your direction. There's nothing you can do to stop it.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's just a lot. Like, I'm going to take Willie Anderson over Tyree Wilson. That's, like, I think that's a thing I'm very confident about. And I think that's one of the arguments in this class, like a pretty big one. And one I'm pretty firm on. Again, like I'm pretty open to what everybody thinks. But yeah, I would go Will Anderson there. With Tyree Wilson, he didn't have great production, and it wasn't against great competition. And I think he has just his upright play style. That's going to get exposed at the NFL level.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to work. And I have issues that he's ever going to change that. I can see why you like him, just the blend of length and power, just jaw-dropping stuff. Like I said, he looks like a fake character out there on the field. But I just don't know if he can consistently play at a decent power level. It's just interesting. I go back and forth, and I think it's a little bit more clear cut with like Lucas Van Ness and Miles Murphy, like what they are and what they're gonna be. But Tyree Wilson, I just have no clue.
Let's wrap this show. I want to pitch you a crazy draft rumor that Steve has sent me from his sickbed. Reddit apparently has become the source of all draft information this year. Nobody knows anything, so everyone's turning to Reddit for the answers. This one is also from Reddit. It's called Patriots Draft Rumor. Let me read it verbatim. A coworker of mine is friends with the former director of player personnel for the Alabama football program. Yesterday, he told me that his friend is hearing New England has the parameters of a trade in place with Houston. New England would receive the second overall pick in the draft in exchange for the 14th pick, a 2023, that's this year, 4th round pick, a 1st round pick next year, and Mac Jones.
I would love that. I would love that so much. I am a Mac Jones truther. I think he's a good quarterback. I think he's a good player.
So that's one side of it. But the other side of it is who are the Patriots going up to 2 for if that happened?
I don't know, but
it's got to be for a quarterback if you're trading away Mac Jones, right?
I love that.
Which QB does Bill Belichick covet?
I don't know. I love that for PFF Bobby, though, if that actually happens. I think that Mac Jones would cook in that offense, but yeah, that's a good question. I don't know who Bill Belichick would be after.
That's a really good point, actually. Like Bobby Slowick, former PFF senior analyst, is essentially going to be running, we assume, a version of the Kyle Shanahan offense. And we said right away that, like, okay, that offense makes every quarterback look good. But a guy like Mac Jones, whose special ability is processing, accuracy, getting to the right guy as quickly as possible, like that's what that offense wants. They want that quarterback. That's why Purdy has been really good so far. Like Mac Jones in that offense would cook. And if that's what Bobby gets right off the bat, and they have number 12 and number 14, right? In this scenario, they get an extra 4th, and they have their quarterback. That's pretty good dealing from the Texans.
That'd be a Texans fan. I'd get a Texans tattoo on my right shoulder. You know, I think that would be amazing. I mean, awesome. If Bill Belichick made that move, I don't know who anybody, like we're hearing all this Levis to Colts
you
stuff
can buy
too,
any of them,
and it's
right?
like we don't know.
You can construct an argument for any of those guys, and you can also understand why anybody would hate any of them, because each one of them has got something to be terrified of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of them have like their best. Like you look at C.J. Stroud at his best moments. Yeah, he looks great. Will Levis, when he's in rhythm, I mean, he just looks the part. You know, just being able to get the ball. His release is probably the quickest I've ever seen, 0.3 of a second on the nose. And when he's in rhythm, it's beautiful. But like everything else, it's just Anthony Richardson. You know, the athleticism. You know, he just kind of. Everybody knows what he can do in an open field, and just the arm strength that he has. So, yeah, I mean, it's just. I think we're going to see some chaos. If that happens, I don't know who it would be for. And even if it doesn't happen, I'm not buying the Levis to Indy rumors. I'm not buying that for a second. It's too hot at this point. They want C.J. Stroud or Anthony Richardson. Then again, I don't know. I think we're going to see chaos like we do in every NFL draft, and I'm here for it. I'm excited.
The chaos this year appears to be way more intense than normal years. Like, you have no idea what's happening. Nobody has any. Every insider report you hear is like, I just talked to somebody, and they don't know anything. Like, oh, great, thanks. Nobody seems to have any clue what's happening outside of that first pick. The Belichick thing, though, is really interesting because, you know, he had Brady for basically 20 years. So everyone sort of automatically assumes, well, the guys that Belichick loves are, you know, prototypical pocket passers like Tom Brady. And Mac Jones, you know, kind of makes sense. Right? But he's also, you know, they brought in Cam Newton. Apparently they were high on Lamar Jackson that draft. They were also apparently potentially thinking about trading to number 1 for Baker Mayfield. Like, I don't know that there is a thread like a consistent theme of quarterbacks that Belichick likes. Even if you look at the ones they drafted during the Tom Brady era, there's not a particularly consistent theme amongst those guys either. All right, Bryce Young goes number 1. Who's the QB? Belichick wants it 2. I don't know that there's evidence for that, like within what he's gone for in the past. I think it could be any of them.
Or Bill Belichick's been on Reddit. He knows Will Levis is going 1, and Bill O'Brien's like, give me my guy Bryce Young at 2.
Or would Belichick be crazy enough to trade up to 2 and just draft, Will Anderson or Jalen Carter and then figure out quarterback down the line?
That would be a flex. That's some draft day stuff right there.
Right,
That's,
the movie.
Yeah. That's Kevin Costner on the call.
Belichick is one of the few humans that probably has enough like credit in the bank to be able to say, we're going for next year. We're shooting for Caleb Williams, Yeah,
I mean, the dude could he could do that for 3 years.
Now, unfortunately, they'd give up their next year's first for that, so that's probably not happening. But, if you were I've worked on the basis that I did this when I traded, when I did a mock draft, and I was like, all right, if I'm Carolina, what am I doing? I've already given up a lot to get to this pick. I thought the same thing when the 49ers traded what amounts to 3 first-round picks for their pick, for their quarterback with Trey Lance. If you're going to give up that much, I feel like you need to shoot for special potential, right?
Do you?
I think so. I don't if you're giving up, you can make an argument that if you're giving up that much, the thing you need the most is the highest floor possible. So you can't immediately be ridiculed for for it not panning out. The absolute bare minimum is this guy's okay and I don't get fired. I feel like if you're going to trade that much, you need to come away with the potential that the dude can go toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. If he can't, then what are you doing? What's the point? No?
I guess. I mean, you could see arguments because it's hard to look at the past because you look at the Trey Lance situation, right?
Yes, that's not gone well, obviously.
Yeah, and people want to dog with Mac Jones, but it's no, if Mac Jones was the 3rd pick, 49ers would be pretty hot. It would be good.
At the time, when they first made that trade, the 49ers, there was a lot of talk that he's going for Mac Jones. That's who he wants, right? And I was and that was back when Mac Jones was supposed to be the mid-first-round pick that he ended up being. And then the news was the 49ers want him at 3. And you're really? So I started sort of thinking about it and looking into it. I wrote an article about Mac Jones within that 49ers offense, I think would be amazing. I think that's a really good pick. I think he's worth the 3rd overall pick for that offense. But I was but I wouldn't trade 3 first-round picks for that. So I think there's a difference between you're there now, what do you want to do, and is he worth all of this? And then if you're the Patriots, so you're not thinking about is Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, C.J. Stroud, is he worth the 2nd overall pick? You're is he worth the 14th pick, a first next year, Mac Jones, and a 4th? And you're I like Levis. I like him a lot relative to other people. I would not give that for Will Levis. I don't like C.J. Stroud as much as other people. I would not give that for C.J. Stroud. I think about it for Anthony Richardson. It's a lot. But the potential payoff, if he hits, is insane.
I don't even know if the thing is maybe this let's just say this is an actual rumor and this could happen.
Yeah.
I could see.
Look, the guy on Reddit seems sure. Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he be right?
I mean, Bill Belichick's kind of near the end of his career, right? He's had the best track record of anybody in the history of the NFL. No doubt about that. Maybe this is his last hurrah, and it's I'm going after the guy I think could be a home run, and if he doesn't work out, oh well, c'est la vie.
I'm already in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
see ya.
We're good. I mean, that could be. I think in that case, I could see it through that lens, but it's hard to it's hard guessing what's going through Bill Belichick's brain. I think with Anthony Richardson, the floor is scary. I mean, man, hitting the easy stuff is the most important thing in the NFL. You got to hit the short stuff. Since 2021, Anthony Richardson has a 30.0 grade on 1 to 9 yard throws. That's the worst in the PFF college era. Since 2014, by 8 points. You look at the accurate pass rate, completion percentage, whatever you like, they're not good. Objectively, he has struggled hitting the easy stuff. I know he likes to kind of push the ball downfield. He is aggressive, and the offense kind of supported that. Those deep overs, play pass, all that. But it's a different ballgame in the NFL, and you gotta be able to do everything, and that's what I get worried about, and that's where that floor is just very, very concerning for me.
But don't you think that you can raise that floor by tapping into his running ability? Like, if you run the Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen to an extent game plan, it negates a lot of the bad from a passing point of view.
I mean, Chicago was pretty bad last year, and that's what they kind of did.
But they also had nobody around him. Like, their offense in terms of EPA per play was like a hair under league average, which obviously isn't good. But like, when you consider he had no wide receivers and not a good offensive line, that's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, I in the Fields case, like, I think Chicago was in the right mind by trading back and sticking with Fields. I think they had to do that. I think that's the right decision. I still think that there could be room to improve for Fields.
Of course, but from a floor point of view, like, that's my point, right?
We made the argument with Malik Willis, and that was just not even viable. Like, that wasn't an option last year.
But I do think that the difference between Willis and Richardson, other than the fact that Richardson is still in a different world athletically and size and all that kind of stuff, is he is further along. Like, Willis was one read, run. Like, if it's one read, it's not there, run.
Yeah, and I'm not saying they're like the same.
Richardson does process. Like, he does work through full progressions. He wants to be a pocket quarterback. Now, once he puts the ball in the air, it's like a randomizer. Who the hell knows where it's going? But he's way more advanced from just what he's doing process-wise, reading a defense, working through a progression than Malik Willis was.
Well, yeah, and with Richardson, I think he wants to be that. Can he do that? I don't. He had some bad decisions.
Sure, yeah. But being able to read a progression, I think, is an important part of that floor. If you can't, if you've never gone through a progression, one read run, that I don't think that's where I would learn from the Malik Willis thing last year and say that is a low floor. Even if you're a special runner, I don't know that you can build an offense with that. If you can read a progression, if you can work through a defense, if you can tell me what you're seeing, then I think we can talk about raising a floor with tapping into your running ability. Because, Fields was dead last in the league in yards per game, passing, right? But the Bears' offense was just below average in EPA per play. That gap being bridged is the running stuff. So I think that's the floor, is a slightly below average offense because he can run like nobody else.
Yeah, and again, I get why people like Anthony Richardson a lot, and I'm just saying, he did have some impressive moments, getting through his progressions, doing a full field read, all that stuff. But he also had way more examples of just horrible decisions that you typically you don't want to see from a guy that's getting projected in the top 5. And that's when I get concerned, okay, I don't know if he can actually handle that type of load. And I get the high floor offense with his rushing ability, but at the end of the day, it's can he win you a Super Bowl? That's where I'm thinking of ranking these quarterbacks and thinking, where would I take him? Can this guy win me a Super Bowl? And with Anthony Richardson, again, I'm just not sure. You look at his play action passing grade, 91.3. No play action, 52.4. He's got more turnover-worthy plays than big-time throws without the play pass. And that was a big key to that Florida offense. Hitting those deep overs. It was cheat-coded. You know?
But think how many of those play action passes you're going to be able to give him if you have a Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields style running offense that he can work off the back of.
Sure, that's 30% though, and the other 70%, it's you're gonna have to do a little bit more. You're gonna have to be.
If he doesn't get any better than he is right now, it's not going to work. He's not going to hit the. But my point being, I think the floor is higher than people are scared of because of that. Because of what you can prop it up with the running stuff. Jalen Hurts, the Eagles had a top 10 offense in EPA per play the year before last, when Hurts was not great, okay, maybe as a passer, but you're if he doesn't play any better than this isn't going to work. They were top 10 because he added 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns on the ground or whatever. If you get that kind of production out of Richardson from a running point of view, it means your offense doesn't stink right away, right? Which is the floor part. But B, it also gives you time to get him better in the passing stuff. And if he doesn't, then fine, you move on to go in a different direction. He doesn't work out, but it buys you that 3 years to figure that out, or 2 years, or whatever it is. So I'm not as scared of his floor as a lot of people. His turnover-worthy play rate was 3.3%, which is not good, but it's not scary.
Yeah, and like I said, obviously the dude is arguably the best athlete to ever come out of the quarterback position, ever.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see it in the test. He blew him out of the water. The escapability's nuts. I mean, we talked pressure to sack rate earlier with Henson Hooker. His was at 29%. Anthony Richardson's just 9%. That's advanced at the collegiate level because that's typically the one issue you see with college quarterbacks. They just can't handle muddy pockets. They can't handle pressure. And that's why we really see, I mean, we talk about, pass rush coverage, and that's why at the collegiate level, pass rush and coverage are equally as important. At the NFL level, you get that coverage in there. It's just like whether or not it's all about, are you confident Anthony Richardson can do the simple stuff? I think that's kind of the big question with the floor, and that's where I have some doubts just given what we have seen. But again, the dude's thrown 455. He's dropped back 455 times. Thrown a pass less than 400 times, right? So we haven't really seen a lot. Maybe it's just a small sample. It very well could be. He has one full season to work. I think round one guy, just all about situation and who really wants to take a swing and kind of developing him. And if you told me, 5 years from now that he's a top 5 quarterback, I'd believe you. I'd be like, yeah, I could definitely see that. But if you say he's not starting, could also see that too.
Yeah. I mean, I do think obviously situation is critical for him, but it's different, I think, from certainly Jalen Hurts. But if you're taking him this high, if you don't have that kind of plan for him, like, what are you even doing? I'm assuming that anybody that drafts Anthony Richardson at the top of this draft is going in with that kind of game plan. Like, this is what the offense is going to look like around him. We're going to prop him up with the run game for a while, including like his own part of the run game. And then it's going to be a 2-year project. He's working with his own individual QB coach. He's going to be part of the process. Like, we're going to get him better in the passing part of this. And year one probably won't be good. Like, he'll have a PFF grade in the 50s, maybe, right? And that'll be based off his run game. And after 2 years, we might be saying this guy stinks like Josh Allen. But then it comes together once he sort of gets better year on year. Like, I do think I'm not as concerned with the floor. I think the ceiling is the question. It's like, can we actually get him anywhere near what we think the ceiling is?
How much do you think, like, let's say he is sliding, because, like, we have seen some, pretty plugged-in people say that he could be sliding a little bit. I've seen mock drafts from, highly regarded people that have him in the 20s. Do you think, like, the reason why he could slide is less about them being scared about the floor, but more scared about, how long it's going to take to develop him? Because not a lot of people have 3 to 4 years to develop a guy. And, developing a quarterback in that time span is pretty rare. Like, seeing Josh Allen's and even Jalen Hurts kind of get to that point, it's pretty rare. You typically know what you got early on. But, do you think people are scared of just the timeline that's kind of ahead with him?
Yeah, I think it's being scared of those first 2 years, right? Not that the floor is necessarily incredibly low, but it's like, think of how much crap the Bills were taking after those first couple of years, right? In terms of, that guy stinks. Josh Allen's terrible. Like, the Bills made the wrong call. Josh Allen is awful. And yet, all the way along, they were saying, this is the guy. We love Josh Allen. This guy's incredible. He's a leader. He's natural. Like, it's going to come. It's happening. He's getting better. They bought into him 100%. But if you don't, like, if you aren't 100% sure, like, that sort of media storm after those first couple of years, if he hasn't immediately become amazing, is tough to navigate. Like the 49ers are getting with Trey Lance, and he barely stepped foot on the field. Like, it's like, this guy stinks. This is awful. This is the worst decision you've ever made. Like, that's a real thing. Owners have to hear that. Teams have to deal with it. Like, everyone's going to get under pressure if it doesn't work immediately. And I just think teams are scared of navigating those waters for the first couple of years.
And I will say, like, in that draft class, I did not like Trey Lance. Like, I would not have taken that big investment on him because for the same reasons as Anthony Richardson, I wasn't sure if he could execute the simple stuff.
Yeah, and I don't think Trey Lance is, like, I think recent precedent for anything you're kind of comping to in the NFL is kind of important. So, like, Orlando Brown is a good recent precedent for DeJuan Jones, right? Trey Lance is a bad recent precedent for Anthony Richardson. Like, we took a guy with almost no passing experience in college who was a really good athlete with a great arm, who could be a part of a run game. And in Shanahan's offense, you're like, wow, that's a perfect system for it. And so far, in incredibly small samples, he's been bad. And he's been beat out for the starting job by Mr. Irrelevant. Like, that's a bad precedent. Like, that it can't do anything but hurt your opinion of, like, Anthony Richardson's trajectory, because there's too many parallels between the two.
Yeah, and, I think that just goes with, like that's probably always going to be my mindset with these guys, just because of the way we all think of the game differently, right? We all see the game differently. And that's why I love, people like Chris who are doing I'm going to put these players the way I want to put them, the way I see them. That's very important. I think there's a lot of getting the whole consensus, there is a strong correlation there. The consensus is usually pretty good, but, you got to make sure if you want to kind of get everything in there, getting your own internal opinion as to, if it is a little, people call it hot takey, but it's just everybody sees the game differently. And I think that's where we all need to kind of, it's never going to happen, but everybody recognize that it's not crazy. You know what I mean? Everybody has their own thing. And with these types of quarterbacks, again, so much of the quarterback position is executing that simple stuff. And that's where I just get really scared. That's where I got scared with Trey Lance. And that's where I'm getting scared with Anthony Richardson. I think trading up for Anthony Richardson, let's say Bill Belichick does do that. The Pats pull out that card. They make a big power move, and they get Anthony Richardson second overall. I wouldn't like that at all. I would be pretty critical of that. But then again, I don't have a Super Bowl ring, and Bill Belichick has, however many. But, at the end of the day, I get scared about investing too much into him. If you're sitting back there and he's at Houston, if you're at 12 and he's still there, you got Will Anderson at 2. Wouldn't hate it, I wouldn't take him there, but I respect it. It's just, again, there's just a big unknown cloud, I think, with Anthony Richardson more so than really anybody, because it's just a big projection.
At least you wouldn't be turning him over to Matt Patricia as the offensive mastermind to bring him on. They've got a real offensive coordinator this year, so that might help.
If Mac Jones goes to Houston, he'd be playing with the great OC, and I think he could probably light it up.
This year, I do think it's a good point that this year, more than most, I'm not going to say any because I'm sure there have been drafts like this, but more than most drafts I can remember, this is a year where wild outlier takes make sense. As long as you can come with reasons why you have a guy draft, ranked wherever, or high or low, what you like, what you dislike. There's such a weird collection of talent this year in terms of strengths and weaknesses, what they're missing, what they bring to the table. There is such a sort of strange dearth of amazingly blue chip players. Fine, you can have Jackson Smith and Jigba as your number one receiver. Makes perfect sense. Most people do. On the other hand, you can easily construct an argument that says that guy's a slot receiver only. There's 5 X receivers I think are better in this draft than him, and he's way down the board. Give me Quentin Johnston, give me whatever guy that you think has the talent to be that X. Give me Cedric Tillman over him. You can make that argument, and it's I wouldn't agree with it, but it's not stupid. It's not absurd. It's not just trash for clicks. You can construct that argument and defend it, and there's no way of disproving it right now. We're gonna have to wait and see who's right. And the quarterbacks in particular, everyone's kind of settled on this idea that Bryce Young is number one. I agree with that. I think that's the most reasonable conclusion to come to. I also, his size terrifies me. The dude is my size, and at some point, he's either going to get fallen on by a dude that weighs 350. He's going to have, a dude that weighs 350 is going to have him in the grip, toss him into the floor, and he's a passenger, and we don't know if he's going to get up from that hit or if he's broken, right?
Yeah.
And you can't get away from that. That's a thing. That's going to happen.
It's so much different from 2021. Since we're on the topic of 2021, looking at what the Niners did going up for Lance, this class is just completely different in terms of the structure, you were just talking about. There was no we don't really have that this year at Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell for the Bengals, right? And that's a hotly contested debate, and that was something I was very passionate about because it's very clear.
Right. Wide
receivers just the impact if Chase hits star status and he hit it. The impact that he's going to have is so much more greater than if Sewell hits star status, right? You look at number 2, and it's Zach Wilson, people like Seth, very smart. I think one of the smartest people, Seth Galina, who works here, who will be here on the draft show day 2 and day 3. He's one of the smartest guys. He was very concerned about that offense he was in. He's I don't know. That there was some debate there about whether that's the slam dunk number 2 pick, and then you have the Niners there at 3. It's what do you traded up all this, and you're going to invest in Trey Lance, is Mac Jones a safer option there? Probably better for you. There was just so much of that in that class, and it was a very good class overall in terms of even non-quarterbacks, very deep. Micah Parsons, Rashawn Slater, all that. But there was a lot more clear debate that was to be had there. This class, it's open. I think honestly the only thing you can really debate is Bijan. You taking him 8 overall. I don't think you probably should, but
it's so, like, I think there's so many arguments in this draft class where there's a dozen different ways of seeing it, and all of them are legitimate. It's all a case of what do you value? What are you scared of? Like, we're all, generally speaking, identifying similar things. It's just a case of which is the most important thing. Like, you and I differ on Anthony Richardson. Like, you're terrified by his inability right now to do the simple stuff, which makes perfect sense. Like, that's a really important part of playing quarterback. I'm enamored by the idea of what you can do with a guy like that in today's NFL. And, like, all these plays where Cam Newton would, like, just was a cheat code, right? That guy he was bigger than defensive ends trying to chase him down. He would make plays out of nothing because you had nobody on defense who could match up with that guy. We have a guy the same size who runs 2/10 of a second faster in the 40. Like, we've never seen this before. It's insane. So I think you can prop up a lot of the crappy quarterback play for a while and then figure out if you can develop that down the line. But I think this year generally, like, just across the board, has so many debates and discussions that are all valid. Like, and yet everyone's treating it, if you're outside the consensus, you're an idiot, or you're a troll, or whatever.
Yeah. And even too, it's like, you look at the positions up top, like tackle, for example. It's like, you have Darnell Wright 1. I don't agree with it. You're scared of Darnell Wright. You don't have him in your top 5. I get it, because before this past year it wasn't good, and he still has a little bit of issues, and the offense he was in kind of helped him out a little bit. For what it's worth, I have him tackle 3 or 4. I just haven't really decided. I think he's okay. I think he's pretty good.
There's almost no position where I think there's a clear, inarguable, like, ranking, where there's a clear, like this is number one, this is number 2, and this is basically not up for debate, right? Like, we think Will Anderson should be that guy, but there's a lot of people that think Tyree Wilson should be ahead of him. Like,
that's a good, like, the number 2 in particular. Like, I think again, like, Bryce Young, I think that's probably, like, he's got to be 1.
Yeah,
I think
even
Brian Branch,
like,
he's probably got to be number 1 at safety.
Right.
Osiris Torrance got to be number 1 at guard, unless you're putting Peter Skronsky in.
Right, but even then, like, those positions, it's a 1, and then after that it gets muddy as hell, like cornerback, right?
Number 2, it's wide open.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is it's a weird draft, because as much as it might not be a good draft in terms of talent and how high the standard is overall, because of that, it's wide open. Like, all bets are off. Nobody has any idea what's happening. There are going to be people that hate picks on draft night and people that love the same pick on draft night, simply based off what you value and what you covet.
Exactly. It's like, are we going to argue Kalijah Kancey or Brian Brzee as the second best interior defensive lineman? It's like, we're talking about 2 different dudes here, completely different games. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Like,
I'm
the closer we get to this draft, the more excited I am about all the craziness that could unfold. We're going to be back tomorrow. Steve, hopefully, will be off the deathbed by then. We'll do a show in the morning. Then we're going to have the live stream during round 1 of the draft. We're going to be covering every single pick here in the studio with Chris Collinsworth, with Steve, again, assuming he's back, and Trevor Sikkema as well. And then immediately after that round 1, me and Steve will be going live with our podcast reaction to the first round. And then that's the start of our draft coverage. We'll be covering every single round of the draft live here. So hang out with us on the YouTube channel, Pro Football Focus YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll see you then.